Just going to wait a couple of minutes to make sure they let everybody in, and we'll get started in about a minute. All right, let's do it. Good morning, everyone. This is Matt Gishard. I am chair of the Walnut Creek Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau Civic Affairs Forum, and today we have the post-election forum brought to you by the Walnut Creek Chamber, the Danville Chamber, Livermore Valley Chamber, and Pleasanton Chamber of Commerce in association with the law firm Hoag Fenton. We're very pleased to have former Assemblyperson Catharine Baker. A special counsel with Hoag Fenton is going to be our moderator here today. Also, we have Rob Lapsley, president of the California Business Roundtable, Sean Wilson, a political consultant and co-host for East Bay Insider, and Judy Lloyd, CEO of the Danville Area Chamber of Commerce. We're excited to see that a little more than 70 people have signed up for this forum. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Catharine to begin the forum.
Yeah, let's get it started. So thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. You know, we don't call this an election post-mortem because that's very grim. This is sort of an after-action report and what it means to us, especially because politics is local and it matters what actually the recent midterms mean for us here in California and here in the East Bay and our local communities. So very grateful to our program panelists, participants today. I'm going to say a little bit about them. I'm going to hit them with some questions, and you can be typing your questions into the Q&A as well. And we have a fantastic panel. I guess I should say again, I want to thank our sponsors. That again was the Walnut Creek Chamber of Commerce Civic Affairs Committee, Danville Area Chamber, Pleasanton Chamber, and Livermore Chamber with Hoag Fenton Law Firm. Okay, we have, starting with ladies first, of course. So we have Judy Lloyd, who is CEO of the Danville Area Chamber of Commerce, which covers not only the town of Danville and its neighbor Alamo, but other areas beyond the San Ramon Valley. Judy is someone who knows politics well. She's served as an appointee in 2 presidential administrations and has also run for office herself and is on the National Federation of Independent Business Organizations PAC board. And Judy's is a resident, of course, of Danville. And so we're going to get some great insights from Judy today. Good to see you, Judy. Thank you for joining us.
We also have me.
Yeah, we also have Sean Wilson, who's a longtime Bay Area political consultant. He is, as mentioned, a co-host of the East Bay Insiders podcast. And if you're not a listener, this is a free plug to the podcast, and you're way overdue for an updated session. So Sean also is someone who has worked a long time as a leader in the staff within Alameda County politics. He's been a chief of staff and senior staff to both Supervisor Scott Haggerty and Supervisor Dave Halbert in Alameda County. I know you're not speaking on their behalf today, but good morning, Sean. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
And a very special guest is Rob Lapsley, president of the California Business Roundtable, which is an organization of the state's top business leaders dedicated to advocating for and monitoring, promoting a good economic environment in California. Rob has also served in politics and political analysis for many years. He was political director at Cal Chamber, also served as deputy undersecretary in the Secretary of State's office here in California. And I'm just picking and choosing a couple of things from your bio, Rob, but knows all things about, I think, every single race in California. It's a great kind. So thank you, Rob, for joining us. Okay, I'm just going to kick it off. Again, we're going to start with some questions. We're going to cover specific races in a moment, specific ballot measures, the legislative seats, congressional, our local races. But first, I want to go to you, Rob, because everyone's telling us these midterms didn't turn out the way anybody expected. There's a consensus on that. Where the difference is the why. I'm hearing youth vote, Dobbs in Prop 1, Trump or anti-Trump fervor. You know, it rained in Southern California excessively on election day, a change in who votes by mail, who doesn't. Can you give us some, before we dive into the races, a sense of why the midterms were not the typical midterms here in California?
So great question to start. And again, thank you everyone this morning for being here, Catherine. You know, with you, it's always a great pleasure, but my business colleagues, as well. So thank you for this opportunity. You know, it's interesting where California has shaken out in this. Obviously, there's going to be tremendous analysis going to the question you just asked over the next few months. And, you know, from what we see preliminarily, and I say preliminarily because in California now, we don't have election day, we really have election month. Because it takes 30 days to count all the ballots, and you really want to see exactly where all this is shaken out. We're currently, let's look at the macro standpoint very quickly, 21.9 million registered voters in this election. We're on track for a turnout statewide of approximately 53%. That is way below what the projections were and what it was 4 years ago at 64%. So part of the explanation of what, you know, this question will be is what was the drop off and where did it come from and why? But to your point, very quickly, I think it's all of the above. You know, I think we're going to see a drop off among some of the Republicans in some of this, which is counterintuitive. Now, maybe there's still about 4 million ballots to count statewide. Maybe they'll show up in that. If that's the case, there may be changed outcomes on some of these races at the end. But right now, it looks like they haven't shown up in the way some people thought they would. And so at a statewide level, we're seeing, you know, Caruso losing in LA, for example. We're seeing a lot of different measures, local measures pass on taxes.
Yeah.
That weren't necessarily anticipated. So with that, the Trump effect, no question in our mind from what we saw in all of our research. It is big here in California. We knew that, but we thought it would also help motivate some others. Overall, in this whole election, last point, even though there are all those different pieces impacting the election, this was actually more of an incumbent election. Incumbents throughout the state basically won. We'll see if there's any exceptions to that. A couple races are still close, but for the most part, you know, 98% plus are going to win. So that's an interesting point after redistricting as well.
Yeah, an incumbents election, something to see. We had lots of open seats. I know the legislature we're going to be looking at potentially a third of the legislature, new members, just
Correct.
because of the turnover. And we will get to those seats. And of course, a lot of the data, you know, the granular data about who specifically showed up where doesn't come out for several more weeks, if not like a full month or so. But we'll turn to that. Okay, Sean, I want to ask you a little bit about this as well. From what you were watching in the local races, was on the ground here locally, particularly in Alameda County, did you see a driver different than that made these midterms different? Maybe it was maybe fewer Republicans showing up, or a higher youth vote, or labor was more engaged in some open seats. Anything before we dive into those races on an observation why the midterms were different locally?
Yeah, you know, I think if you take a snapshot of the electorate and look at what Political Data Inc. PDI does in terms of tracking the votes, and I've tracked the votes from as soon as they started tracking it, I think it was a week before the election to the day of the election, and it was pretty consistent. You know, older Democratic white voters voted in Alameda County more heavily than everyone else. And will that trend continue? Who knows? Like the last speaker spoke and said, this is election month. I mean, it is election month. And in California, it used to be fun on election night. And now it's like watching half of the Super Bowl and then watching the third quarter a week later, and then the fourth quarter 2 weeks after that. It's not as fun as it used to be. But getting back to your question, I didn't see any differentials between what has happened in prior elections to this elections. What I did see is the fact that that first tranche of votes was very conservative. And that's what you saw on election night. It's going to get less conservative. And when we break down a couple of these races, you'll see to my point that it's going to get more progressive and liberal as these votes trickle in.
Well, you actually got to my next top line question before we get all granular about the races. And that is, you know, the last few years, traditionally, Republicans were really good at turning out ballots before Election Day. there was a flip that started happening, particularly in 2020, or you tell me if this is just, it's not reflected in the data, where Republicans are showing up more on election day by dropping off ballots. And what used to happen is the late vote counts, particularly the ones that started trickling in after election day and provisional ballots, would sharply turn to the left for Democratic candidates. Are you still seeing those trends? It sounds like Sean, yeah, I mean, it might have looked a little bit more like that. Or Rob or Sean, are you seeing those trends still the same? Or is it really the case that things flipped and now Republicans show up on election day and not so much early?
Well, I'll just say real quick, if you looked at Alameda County and Contra Costa County, Alameda County, for example, had 31,000 people show up the day of the election and cast their vote in a voting booth. They also had 100 and something thousand people drop off their ballot on election day. This is what extends the time in which a registrar has to count the votes, because you can count the ones that vote on election day, but the ones that trickle in, that vote, 2 weeks prior, but hold on to their ballot, is baffling to a consultant that looks at the tracking and says, hey, this many people haven't voted yet. Well, they probably have. It's just sitting on their counter and they haven't turned it in yet. So yeah, it's been pretty consistent to your point.
Rob, you see the same thing?
Yeah, so to Sean's point, it's completely changed in where we are in California's elections process. Completely changed. So, and it started really what we saw around the pandemic, but also it's changed with all this rhetoric at the national level about election deniers. We truly believe that's impacted behavior. And what we're seeing, and Sean's exactly right, what we saw is, what the votes were coming in, they now tend to be more Democrats coming in earlier, because obviously there's over 10 million Democrats, so there's a lot more. Republicans clearly now hold their votes. They don't trust the mail system. It's fascinating what we saw just in this cycle in the last 2 weeks. They don't trust the mail. So that means now that they're actually having a large number of votes coming into the vote centers. We don't know where they're from. When you look at these, before we could trace them back to precincts, now when they count them, we have no idea where these ballots are coming from in any given county. Because they're all mixed together, right? They all are ultimately attributed back to precincts at the end in the canvas. But for right now, for us trying to figure out, does a candidate have a chance? We don't know where they're coming from or what's left. So there's, for all of us, it's like, we don't know. All we can say is we don't know.
It's a consultant's nightmare, basically.
But it has changed. And it needs to be figured out going forward too, for all of this.
A totally different model.
Fundamental changes.
For sure. Judy, want to chime in on either of those first two questions before we get into some of these propositions and races, just about what was different about the midterms and the voting patterns? And you're on mute. You're on mute, my friend. Of course. It's coming off. I know. There we go.
You'd think after 4 million Zooms, I would know where the mute button is, right? So, to me, one of the interesting things is, and I really do think this had an impact on Republican turnout, is Republicans were told repeatedly, and we all know what news station they watch, they were told repeatedly, the election's over, we're going to win the House, we're probably going to win the Senate, don't worry about it. And if you look, I can just look at Contra Costa numbers, our vote by mail was 36.5. Election day voters, only 4.7 on election day, for a total turnout right now of 41.34. Now they think they're going to get close to 50% in Contra Costa, but that's still under what we would have expected. And so I do, to Rob's point, I do think that there's I guess I hate to use the word malaise. We used to use that word back in the day, but there is a malaise on the Republican side, which shouldn't have happened, because I believe we as Republicans, and again, I'm speaking as myself, not as CEO of the chamber, Republicans had an expectation, woo, we're going to go win the House. And now look where we are. We're probably still going to get there, but may take a little bit longer.
What a difference a week makes. It's
That's
election
right.
days does seem like it was a month ago. So, okay, well, let's get into some of those particular. I want to start with the propositions. And I don't even know that we need to cover all of them, but I do want to start with those and then see where we go from there. So about midway through the summer, the Walnut Creek Chamber Civic Affairs Committee hosted a panel that I was on with Lisa Tucker, a well-known local, and she works on congressional races as well, political consultant. We were asked, is Prop 1 or the Dobbs decision going to make a difference? And both of us said, no, because our rationale was people have already self-sorted on the issue of abortion, and it's not going to change the way they vote. And if it has a turnout effect, it was going to be at the margins. Rob, were we wrong?
I believe you were, and you're giving it your best assessment at the time. But what we're seeing right now, and it's funny, I had that same discussion with at the U.S. Chamber and the National Roundtable in a private forum back in July as well, saying, how do you guys not think abortion is going to impact things? Because I was just kind of advocating for California. Well, we believe right now that it definitely had an impact. And the national exit polls certainly showed that economy and abortion were running very close. Economy first, inflation first, but abortion right after. And where? Suburban women, just like it was being theorized. So, and when I look at these numbers across California, to me, I definitely see, what I believe is that impact as well, at least preliminarily.
Okay, yeah. So that it turned out to be a driver. In the middle of the summer, you can be wrong, and that has happened. It's rare, but actually it happens all the time. So again, there wasn't a real contested gubernatorial or Senate race, right? So that wasn't. Some people don't go to the polls to vote necessarily for a particular office holder, but maybe that Prop 1 was what did it. We may see it a little bit later in the data. Sean, in the local races that you saw, because we had a lot of combative ones, I want to stick with the proposition issues here for a moment. Did you see the issue of abortion playing a role, or Prop 1 in general, in the races in Alameda County?
I think locally, not as much. I think there was a lot of money spent on local races that haven't ever been spent before in some of the local races in Alameda County. So I didn't think that Prop 1 was the driving factor, although I think Rob is right, that it did have an impact, but not as much as the local races. I mean, again, look, we're Alameda County, it's a progressive county. We feel that abortion is always going to be safe, and then we feel that it's always going to be a right for women. And so I think a lot of it was overshadowed by just some things we've never seen in local races in Alameda County before.
Yeah, well, we're on the precipice. We're going to get to some of those because they were some real expensive and big races. But while I stick with the statewide for just a little bit longer, I don't know that we need to really say much more about the gambling ones. They overwhelmingly lost, and $400 million was spent on it. Dialysis lost again. I imagine we'll see it again because as we talked about in our prior program, and I know our panelists know that there's a union business fight going on there with that one, and we may see it again. But let's talk about Prop 30. Looks like Californians rejected an effort to raise taxes again. That's one way of interpreting it. But at the same time, that was a real weird bedfellows. You had, I think, the CTA and Howard Jarvis on the same side with Newsom against that, but then you had environmental groups. So where I want to go with this, and Rob, given your state involvement, I'm going to start with you once again. What does the loss of Prop 30 say about the temperature Californians have for raising taxes and the business environment generally? Any observations on that?
So it's interesting. We took on Prop 15 2 years ago on the split roll property tax to change Proposition 13 and defeated that in the pandemic. Then this came back saying, okay, it's probably going to have an easier chance because it targets just high income earners. To us, why it lost and what it told us was the governor is a very powerful messenger to Democrats in California. And he was the winner in this election to me, not only in his own race, where he was the second highest vote getter after Senator Padilla, but he really took down Prop 30. His commercial was clear. It defined the issue well, and he was an excellent messenger. And as soon as he went up on TV, that thing started going down and stayed down. And we saw it play out on election night.
Okay. And I'm seeing both Judy and Sean nodding their heads. I kind of see that assessment as well on Prop 30.
Totally. But, I got to say, I was still as confused as ever before on a proposition in my life. I saw firefighters on one side. the governor on another side. If I'm not Sean Wilson that understands this thing to a level that most people don't, I would be just so baffled. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I think a lot of voters were like, when I'm this confused, I'm just going to vote no. But I do
Yes.
think the messenger was clear
True.
that Newsom has a very strong hold in politics in California.
Interesting. Yeah. See Judy nodding her head as well. Okay. I want to talk about one more statewide race, and you're happy to chime in on any other ballot initiatives. I don't want to poo-poo them as unimportant, but the one statewide race that was contested, quite a bit was the one for state controller, which is an important position. This is the fiscal watchdog of the state. And Lan He-Chen was someone who got, a Republican who got the endorsement of, I think, every editorial board, for what that's worth. I think folks on both sides of the aisle would say he was a quality candidate in terms of how he stayed on message. It was policy oriented, and he's looking to get 46% of the vote, maybe a little bit more. Obviously that could change, more than any of the other Republican candidates on the ballot, any of the other contested races. But it's still lost by a good amount. What does this say about the hope for any likelihood that statewide races can be more contested, and that the Republicans have any possibility, I'm not asking for myself here, of getting in, having success at the statewide level? Is there hope from that number that, hey, it's 46% and what was otherwise a bad year for Republicans across the board? Or is that a further nail in the coffin? I'll let anyone want to volunteer for that one first.
And I'm
Rob.
happy to go first if that's okay. Otherwise, be happy to have many of my colleagues go. So a couple takeaways on this. One is candidates matter, particularly at the statewide level. They matter. Number two, the money matters, right? At like every level. And Lonnie, if he had my rule of thumb for him, knowing him well, I said, you're going to need at least $20 million to break through, because people don't know who you are. And obviously it's a big state and it's very expensive. Everything we already know, but it played out in spades in this race. Malia didn't spend as much, but Lonnie didn't, even though he had more money by a little, maybe $1 or $2 million, he didn't have what it takes to break through to voters throughout the state, particularly Democrat voters, to truly say why I'm the better candidate. And he had a message for that, but he didn't have the money to deliver it.
Okay.
And that's the reason he's going to lose.
Yeah, and there
People
wasn't
just don't know
IE
enough about it.
engagement. Yeah,
Right.
I for whatever reason, there wasn't IE engagement on that one.
There was not, and that's on the Republican side, the major donors, that's probably going to be one they're going to regret. That was a big mistake to me on their part. But I think the rule of thumb with them still is, can any Republican win? And no one yet. This may help convince them maybe it's possible with a good candidate.
Okay, that's one takeaway. Not that it's the final nail in the coffin, but that, a candidate who didn't have any money got to 46, 47, maybe, it depends. Maybe it'll be down to 45% in a year where there was no contested gubernatorial or otherwise, for a race for controller, which most Californians don't know what the controller does. One possible way of looking at that. Okay, finally, we're getting into those local races because I know they're important. Okay, the legislature, we had quite a few contentious races in our area. I want to start with Alameda County. I know the numbers off the top of my head. AD 20 and SD 10. AD 20, Sean, I want to let you start with this one. Just describe where the communities that included, AD 20. And I want to ask about the outcome of that race as well. So where is that for us?
Assembly District 20 is the Bill Quirk seat, which now includes Hayward, San Lorenzo, and then comes over the hill east into the Tri-Valley and takes on a little bit of Dublin. And it's a pretty progressive, historically progressive liberal seat. You had two candidates, Liz Ortega, who is a Labor candidate by far, and Sean Kumagai, council member from Dublin, who and it was in the primary, it was a battle, and that's an understatement to what took place in the general. I mean, it turned into a bloody massacre with just dollars thrown after dollar on mail pieces and slandering and just name calling. And it was a vicious race. I haven't seen anything like that. And I'm dating myself, but I haven't seen anything like that since Liz Figueroa ran against Mike Sweeney in the Senate years ago.
That is a while
And
back.
Michael Sweeney did a mail piece against Liz Figueroa, who owed property taxes, and put, you know, her personal information on the mail piece. And we all were sitting around a table and say, hey, this is not a good strategy. This is going to backfire. And I remember Phil Girizzo, a consultant in Sacramento, called us and says, which one of you are political consultants around the table? We said, none of us, but we work as staff. And he goes, drop it in the mail and let me do my job. Well, that turned out to be a bad call. And it was, I think, you know, Sean tried to do the same thing, and it was bad. It was a bad decision, bad mail on both sides. But labor, you know, labor spent millions of dollars on
I was
it
going to ask you, was this a multi-million-dollar race for what was an open seat?
by far. Yeah.
And it's not close. It doesn't look like that race came out close. Does that surprise you, Sean and Rob? Did you think that was going to be a closer race?
No, I didn't think it was going to be a close race. I just think the politics are so left as that district changed, that I think, you know, Liz painted herself as a very, very liberal, progressive Democrat. And, you know, Sean wasn't able to do that as much as Liz was. And labor helped. No, labor won that race. If they get an award, it goes to labor for that race.
And that was this was a Dem on Dem. So two people of the same party race. And some would say business versus labor, although, you know, I don't think the lines were that finely drawn, right? You know, Judy's noting as well, because there was some labor going in for Sean as well. But it was also at Tri-Valley, that district, just a tiny portion of it is Tri-Valley, Dublin, and a little bit of Pleasanton. The rest is Eastern. Rob, from what you were seeing in Sacramento and that community, were they surprised by that outcome? And what can we expect by seeing the seat go that progressive?
Yeah, so the concern was obviously the big contrast between the candidates. One, Liz is a leader in labor, and then you had Sean, you know, who's done a good job on the city council, but Mr. Wilson just articulated it perfectly. You know, there was business support for Sean. There was an effort to see if the numbers could move in his direction after the primary, but it didn't compete with what labor did. And ultimately, we saw the numbers not moving. They were going towards Liz, and so there wasn't nearly as big of an effort or a spend there as there was in other races, for example. So that's unfortunate, but it played out exactly as Sean said.
And Judy, with the NFIB, did they play in that race? And was that one of the races you also saw as kind of business versus labor? And
so we deliberated longer on this race than we did any other race in the entire state, and came down to, quite frankly, how Sean filled out his questionnaire. He was for single payer healthcare. He was for a lot of things that small businesses are not for. And so we ended up NFIB ended up going neutral in that race and not picking.
I see. Yeah. Interesting. Because those are progressive policies, and it sounds like that was it. So that was a multi-million-dollar open seat in California in the East Bay. There was also Senate District 10. Again, this is in the Alameda County part of the East Bay, but these are folks who are going to the legislature, and their vote's going to affect all of us. I think this one is still too close to call. I don't know the latest numbers. I know who might have that at their fingertips, maybe less than 1 or 2 percentage points, but multi-million-dollar. That's Lily May. And well, you know, Sean, this isn't your neck of the woods. I'm going to let you take that one over as well. What are we seeing happen there? And do you want to predict it?
I already predicted both of these races on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, but I will tell you this, it's trending in the direction of Aisha Wahab. And looking at the numbers now, it's 51.3% Aisha, 48.7% Lily May, the mayor of Fremont. And very interesting race, lot of money spent, a lot of commercials, a lot of mail.
Millions. It has to be millions.
Yeah. And this was one where it looked from the beginning in the primary as a very long shot for Aisha Wahab. Did not have one endorser from her own city council on which she served, running against the second largest city being Fremont in Alameda County, the mayor of that city, So you would think, wow, this is David and Goliath. Turned out to be a little bit of the opposite. You know, Aisha fought really hard, great ground campaign, great mail campaign. She did a phenomenal job. I called her to win it just because I think the politics of that area kind of leans towards her in the southern part of the county and in Santa Clara County.
Okay.
So I really think that this one's, again, like you said, too close to call. I think she pulls it out. She's trending up. You know, on election night and a few days after, she was down by a full percentage point. Now she's up by almost 1.25. So I think she's going to continue to trend upward. So we'll see. It's still too close to call, but a lot of money spent on that campaign as well. Labor had a lot to do with it.
One of the excuse me, one of the questions in the Q&A is how much money are we talking about for an open Senate and Assembly race? When we say millions, do you have either of you have a memory if we're in the 5 to 7 million range for either of these seats, or is it more in the 2 to 3 million? Either of you anybody have that at their fingertips yet?
From the
I can
numbers
speak
I've
a little
seen,
bit about that from my experience.
it's gonna end up in the 5 to 7 range.
Okay.
When it's all over.
I think my race in this is ancient history in many respects, 2014, which was another midterm with low turnout. I think I'd spent about $700,000, and it ended up being the most expensive Assembly race when you threw in IEs and everything else. It was around $7 million. And so to answer that question that was asked in the chat, we're multi-million-dollar races. Rob, you want to say anything about SD10 and about that particular race? Then I'm going to look at the legislature generally before we go on.
So just to Sean's point, actually, this is a great disappointment for the business community. Because again, you have a very clear contrast here between the candidates. Lily May has a proven track record of looking at how to balance, progressive issues with real economic development and job growth in a very, I think, pragmatic and constructive way. And I agree. I think Sean's called it. He's right. I don't think she's going to make it. And I think that's a huge disappointment for the business community statewide.
And if I begin in that one, Judy?
We did. We supported Lily.
Okay.
Cal Chamber was out very, very early on that one. And so that had a lot of influence on a lot of places. Again,
for our viewers, that's a business versus maybe more progressive or labor race as well. So I want to step back before we leave the legislature and get into some additional local races. And Rob, I'm going to start with you again, because I know you're looking at all the races in the state. Are we looking at a legislature that is going to be very skewed even more left progressive, or are we looking at more mods going to the legislature? What does it say for the business environment, how the legislature makeup looks right now?
So what we're looking at right now is essentially what I'll call a tie. For the business-friendly Democrats that we're losing, we're bringing in about the same amount. It's still on the margins. I think the most important takeaway right now is for the legislature in both houses that after redistricting, it is a permanent 2/3 supermajority of Democrats, and it's never going to change in the next decade. It just is not. And so who we elect matters, especially in the D versus D races. But we've lost an Adam Gray, for example. He may win a congressional seat in the Central Valley. So we have a couple members who will come in to replace him, but it really is almost all a wash. And the last thing is, when you look at the numbers, the assembly is going to be potentially 60 to 62 Democrats, and there'll be 18, 19 Republicans out of the 80 members. Once we see where all this sorts out, Senate's going to be probably 31 Democrats and 9 Republicans. So it's kind of where things have been. They were 8, maybe they'll get to 9. So no big changes on the margins.
On the margins, and it sounds like in the near term, because open seats are very hard to come across, and we're looking at a 2/3 supermajority for a while. Well, it's whether you're in a state where the 2/3 is Republican Party or a state like California where it's a Democratic Party, it's always best if the sides have to talk to one another. That's all I'm going to say. And
absolutely,
it works better that way. Okay. I want to chime in to some of the additional local races. We're going to turn over just a little bit more in Alameda County, and then we're going to focus the rest of the time on Contra Costa. Major DA race in Alameda County. Terry Wiley, Pamela Price. Looks like, I think this morning, Terry was up by 1%. This is also Contra Costa had a similar kind of dynamic between reformist DAs and maybe more traditional DAs. I'm not sure what terminology to use. That might be how you describe it in Alameda. Sean, how is this race looking, and why is it different than the sheriff's race in June where Sheriff Ahern lost?
Well, I think it's different in one sense, and that is people were just really frustrated with Sheriff Ahern. You know him as well as I do. You know, he was a fantastic sheriff, but a lot of things got politicized with, leftists in Oakland and Berkeley that didn't think that he should serve any longer. Urban Shield and deaths in Santa Rita all contributed to his demise. Why this is different is this is a super important race for Alameda County. You have a new sheriff, and she ran as a sort of progressive sheriff, although her politics are a little more in the middle than what she portrayed during her campaign. But these two candidates that we have now, Pamela Price has said that she's not going to try any cases and not put anyone in jail and give everyone a second chance. And we've seen in the last 2 years, recidivism in Alameda County is on the rise. We had one inmate that had 17 arrests in less than 3 weeks for the same crime.
Good grief.
And our deputies are frustrated. And now you have somebody that looks like, if you look at the trends, she could walk in and be the next district attorney of Alameda County. And, Terry Wiley is from the district attorney's office. He's a prosecuting DA. And Pamela Price has been on the ballot 3 or 4 times in Oakland and in Alameda County. She ran for district attorney before and lost to Nancy O'Malley. She was I think she ran for mayor or something in Oakland. So she has name recognition as far as being on the ballot, but her politics just don't fit in Alameda County whatsoever. To walk into the district attorney's office 2 years ago and tell everyone when she wins, every MFer is getting fired. Like, that's not who you want as a district attorney. Like,
Okay.
it's unbelievable. Like, I can't believe the voters of Alameda County hasn't gotten this one right, because this is scary. This is very scary. And if you look at the trends as of this morning, you're right, 50.42% for Terry, 49.58. She closed a 2% gap from Thursday of last week to Monday. And if that trend continues, she could be the next district attorney in Alameda County, which is scary.
Well, Sean had an opinion about that one. And I can see, I'm an Alameda County resident. I'm not going to say anything because I also serve on the Fair Political Practices Commission. That's why I'm the moderator today, not the talking expert, but that is one to watch. It is definitely a important and very significant race. I think you predicted in the podcast that Terry would win. And I think you did. I can't remember. I do listen. And we're going to see how that one comes out. That's one of those late voting ones. Hey, I was wrong with Prop 1. So we all got to have our moment here. Judy, I want to turn to Contra Costa County for a little bit, and we may have some more Alameda County questions, but I really want to hit some of those. So we had a supervisor's race that, those don't open up very often. A lot of folks don't know exactly what their supervisor does, but once that person is in that seat, they're probably going to be there for a while. And this was one that did folks expect it to be tight? And it looks like it wasn't. What can you tell us about the supervisor's race?
Well, right now, it looks like Ken Carlson is up 54.75 over Deborah at 45.19. So it's definitely not as close as we expected.
Okay.
We, as Bob knows, East Bay Jobs PAC took a look at this. Walnut Creek Chamber took a look at this. I think all of us were surprised that at Ken's margin, quite frankly.
Okay.
And particularly because he went kind of negative early on Deb. And so we thought that would backfire on him. And in fact, it might have actually strengthened the Democrat vote for him.
Yeah.
So it looks like there's still 110,000 ballots out right now, but doesn't seem like that would be enough to shake that margin. in Deb's
Yeah,
favor.
and those late arriving ballots are going to, as we talked earlier in the program, are probably skew more to the Democratic side. This is a nonpartisan race, but different people get their messages and mails from the candidates. So, well, in that race, I guess the last thing I'll sort of ask about it is if there were any surprising, I don't want to say trends, or other than the fact that it wasn't closer, was there any surprising topic that they really talked the most about? Was it housing? Was it social services? Was there something that really gripped people in that race, or no?
You know, I'm not in that district. And so I didn't see all the mail and all the social and everything. You know, I don't know that it was one issue over another. I think that one of the things I would remark on, though, is when you have a former police officer in a community that cares deeply about law enforcement, and then you have a BART board director who's backed by a great deal of law enforcement in the DSA, there was confusion.
Yeah.
Because people couldn't understand, on the one hand, why they weren't backing the law enforcement officer, and on the other hand, you know, well, she's a BART board director, but she's not in law enforcement. I think there probably was some confusion there.
Yeah, understand that. Well, we also had a clerk recorder race. That one didn't turn out, I don't know what the final margins are, but that one is also, I think, pretty much called. There was less, those are two candidates who were in the race in the primary. They didn't get 50+1, and so it spilled over into November. That one has been called, not real close, but there's a San Ramon Valley. Now, San Ramon is the home of Chevron and Bishop Ranch and City Center, major employer hub and major retail and economic hub. And there was a contested mayor's race and also an upset, perhaps, in a city council race. What can you tell us about those two races, Judy, before we move on to a few more?
Well, those I followed very, very carefully, and particularly because these were brand new districts that they were running in. The interesting thing that happened in San Ramon, Sabina Zavar gave up her district to run for mayor. So she couldn't run for both seats. And unfortunately for her, that backfired. Dave Hudson, who's on the Bay Area Air Quality Management District Board and very, very visible and vocal, had a lot of backing from Chevron and allies of Chevron, which ended up propelling him to what I would say was a surprising 50.26% of the vote right now, with Sabina trailing at 27 and Dinesh trailing at 22. I think there was a surprise that the Democrat Party didn't come out higher for Sabina, the same way they did for Marisol Rubio, who won in the 4th district, which was Sabina's district. So Marisol, and many of you here will remember, Marisol ran against Steve Glazer, my former boss. She didn't do great in that race, but she got a heck of a lot of union backing, and that followed through to her District 4 race.
Oh, so you think, I was going to ask you, what do you think made the difference for Marisol in this San Ramon race? And I think you previewed my answer, is that maybe that name ID, she's on San Ramon Services, Dublin San Ramon Services, the water, one of the water boards. That doesn't necessarily get you a lot of name ID, but you think it was the 2020 race against Glazer, and that kind of propelled her through that?
I think Marisol's done an excellent job of keeping those relationships that she had with the union. I mean, I can read you some of the unions that were involved, you know, the steam fitters, shield metal workers, boilermakers, plumbers, bricklayers, teamsters, IBEW, carpenters. That's a big list. And they came in, interestingly, with about 20 grand to support Rubio. And the interesting thing about that race is she ran against Heidi Keniston-Lee, who I know very, very well. She's been a longtime Parks District Commissioner, and she ran the Traffic's bus program. So she's, you know, she was somebody with a lot of community backing, but, you know, clearly didn't have the name ID to pull it off. So,
boy, we're hearing in these races, the legislative races, and even in a local city council race in the San Ramon Valley, the role that labor continues to play in the races. And we're seeing that kind of all over. I want to turn back to Alameda County, and Rob, don't worry, I'm going to rope you in here before we wrap up. But Alameda, thank you, Judy. Those are good tips on what was happening in Contra Costa. There were 2 more city council races where we've gotten to that level in Alameda County that were quite contested. the mayor of Livermore. Sean, this is a dynamic for our viewers who are in different parts of our jurisdiction here. A prior mayor, John Marchand, was termed out in 2020, and Bob Warner won, and he only served one term as mayor. He's had some health issues that made it difficult for him to serve another term. John was able to come back because their rules are you just have to have, I think, a time period of not being in office. And he had a challenge from Moni Knopp, former police officer, realtor, and that race is super tight. What went on? What's going on? What is happening in Livermore? Because that is not just a labor versus business. There's a lot of other big dollars at play. And I know you've got an opinion, Sean, because you haven't been holding back.
Right. Well, before I go there, I just want to tell you, Labor did lose a very important race in Alameda County. They lost the mayor's race in Oakland, which they spent a significant amount of money to try to get Shane Tyler elected. And it appears as though they may have lost that race to Lauren Taylor, who seems to be heading for victory there. But
ranked choice voting in Oakland, by the way, which is a whole nother element, but that's true. That's
we don't
the
have,
biggest
Rob,
city in Alameda.
we don't have time to talk about ranked choice voting and how awkward it is and confusing it is. But the mayor's race in Livermore is something we've never seen before. And one would say that if you look at the city of Livermore, there's a newspaper that is in that city that goes to every register, every household, right, in the city of Livermore for free. They've been controlling and manipulating the perception of that community for over 2 years. So one would say that Moni has got a pretty good head start. So the fact that John Marchand is actually leading now 51.56 or 51.59 to 48.41, it's increasing. He's closed the gap, but he's also, well, he was down by about a half percentage point on Thursday. Yeah. He jumped up and is now in the lead. So I think John Marchand, going back to name recognition, as Judy was saying, does have a lot to do with it. Money has a lot to do with it. But in this particular instance, money didn't really have a lot to do with it, because we saw for the first time ever in the city of Livermore over $200,000 spent in a mayor's race from one side versus maybe 50 on John's side. So yeah. Moni Knopp was able to get some money into this community, which was significant and unheard of. So not only did he have a head start by being featured in the newspaper, kind of, for almost 2 years, but also he got an infusion of money. He got a lot of independent expenditure cash, and he's losing in this race, which I thought he would lose, and I thought it would be a close race, but this is months ago, like when you prognosticated the Prop 1, I did that and made the mistake of doing it too early in the summertime, when I had no anticipation that this type of money would be thrown at this race. It was significant, and thankfully, I don't think it's going to have the impact that they wanted. I think John Marchand pulls it off. He's trending up, and as these votes come in over the next, hopefully, day or two, we'll end this. I think he becomes victorious and regains his mayoralship in the city of Livermore.
Yeah, so I mean, a local race where you're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, not including what you're saying is news coverage that comes from that area.
Well, so I just would add this though, and I think Rob would appreciate this. Look, when you take a city, right? You have a city this size, and then you break it off into districts, which is the first time in the city of Livermore. Like, and even in the city of Fremont, you're going to have a elected city council member in the city of Fremont with 2,000 votes. In the city of Livermore, if you put $20,000 into this little small district where there's only 14,000 voters, that's a huge influence of money that could make a major, a major damage in your campaign. If $20,000 or $30,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in district races, that's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, it is.
You look at the city of Antioch, they have first-time district races, right? You have Joy Moats in District 1 and Lori in District 4. And Lori got kicked out of her district seat and is running against a council member from her own district. And they're at like 1,100 votes and 1,000 votes, respectively. They're a city of 70,000 people, and 1,000 votes is going to be your next city council member. Like, these districts, I know it was all intended to make more people inclusive and get more people involved, but it's really just, it hasn't, for a consultant, it really kills my business, because I can't charge the same amount of money for a district race with only 12,000 people as I can with 100,000 people. So it killed our ability to make money in these local races. But joking aside, it's interesting to look at, how these districts now are really
Really doing it.
different in politics.
It is for sure.
Interesting.
So, okay. Well, one more local race. I want to remind our viewers in the last 9 minutes that we have, if there's a question we haven't already looked in the crystal ball and grabbed for you, please be sure to put it in there. And that is Pleasanton. So one of our areas in Eastern Alameda County, of course, is the city of Pleasanton. That did not have a contested mayoral race. Been pretty contentious on the city council for the last 2 years. And there was two challengers. One was for an open seat and another was for challenging in a sitting council member. And that a city council member who was challenged, Julie Testa, looks like she's going to be able to prevail because there were two candidates running against her that their vote combined is more than 50%. So you might have a city council member who can prevail, but with less than 50% of the vote. And then the other open seat was a blowout. Actually, big change, not a big difference between the two. Any observations on that Pleasanton City Council race, Sean, or predictions?
Well, I think you called it. I mean, the one race with the incumbent, she's heading to victory, and it's because she was challenged by two individuals. Had that not be the case, I don't think she would be heading to victory. On the other race, I didn't think it was going to go the way it went. I don't follow Pleasanton the elections as closely as I should. I didn't have a horse in that race, and I was a little busy with other things. But I know the two candidates, and I was surprised. I thought that the one that is losing would do a little bit better because he's been around politics for such a long
time. Yeah. Well, there's something there. We're going to shift back to our host community, Walnut Creek. It was, again, they have a vibrant, wonderful retail in downtown. They have a lot of good things going on in Walnut Creek. Judy, the city council race, we had Cindy Silva and Matt Francois and some challengers. What are your observations about how that one played out? Because I believe both Cindy and Matt prevailed pretty handily.
They did. And they've been both excellent representatives for Walnut Creek. And, kudos to Bob and Matt and the Walnut Creek Chamber for, getting on board with them early. I do think if I could spend just a second on Measure O.
Yes, the Walnut Creek tax measure. Yeah.
So I think the biggest surprise with Measure O was the margin of victory. So it won so far with 65% of the vote, and it only needed a majority to pass. Now this was a tax measure, half sales tax measure. And my belief and conversations I've had with people in Walnut Creek is largely that happened because people like the idea of oversight. They like the idea of they thought it was a great measure for the city. They thought the city did a good job articulating what it was they want, and the chamber support certainly helped for that to prevail. Chambers don't come out for tax increases very often, but this was one that just made sense, and it's going to help them with services that they need for facilities and for police and other things.
Well, that was, I will say, when the and Rob, your data mine and political mine too. Chambers don't come out for tax measures very often, and in a midterm year that when this was being promoted was looking like the economy not great, inflation was high, people were hurting, gas prices high, and the conversations about putting a tax measure on the ballot, a lot of folks might have turned the other direction and ran. Do you find it surprising that a local measure like this wins by 65% tax measure?
So again, there's 230 local tax measures across the state, and we are tracking. Some of them were put on with a loophole for under Proposition 218. So some of them are going to have a problem. But for these measures, I think in Oakland, 4 tax measures passed. That it was fascinating to us because they were, I thought, a more joint agreement between business and government and labor there. But it's really changed the fabric. A lot of the companies that came into Oakland from San Francisco were there because of lower taxes. And now they have raised their taxes significantly on them, but it's under a joint agreement. So they're recognizing, right, that there has to be some of the issues in Oakland taken care of that are so dire right now that they're going to do that. And I say that because I think it's the future of where we are headed and where we need to head, but it only under the auspices of if it's done together. when we get run over because there is not the ability to sit down and look at what is a balance for how business can survive and still grow while still looking out for the community it intends to grow in, is when we have problems. And if we can look at how to do that together, we can fix a lot of things. But so often there's no willingness to do that from the other side. And I hope for what we see moving forward, there's going to be more of that.
Well, amen to that. I think that is that's a great message to have there. I'm going to lightning round you real quick here because I do see Bob Naylor has asked about anything about the congressional races, any status, because it looks like it's going to come down to California. Rob, you want to give us a prediction?
Well, I believe the congressional majority was almost called this morning. They're one seat away, so they're basically saying it's done, right? Number one. But number two, there are some interesting races here. So in the Central Valley, Adam Gray is essentially in a deadlock to see where that seat goes. But the big seat that's being watched right now nationally is the Katie Porter seat in Orange County.
Yeah.
And that is being her challenger, Scott Baugh. I can tell you while we're on this Zoom that I just got a text update that she was up about almost 5,000 votes. It's now down to 2,000. The later ballots got counted last night. And
yesterday.
Suddenly it's all changed again. I believe that Katie Porter wins that seat, but at the end of the day, she is going to win narrowly, and she is in full panic mode. And what she had anticipated was going to be a big win and then a race for the U.S. Senate in 2 years. So it's
Good to
gonna be very
know.
interesting.
I thank you for that. Last lightning round, because I know we're down to 2 minutes, is there's a question about the Concord race. There was a city council member, a candidate in Concord. Any reasons? I don't know, Judy, if you were taking a look at that seat, and I see Bob from the chamber has joined us again. Anybody want to comment on that council race and why it went the way it did?
Go ahead, Bob.
Actually, to be honest with you, Catherine, I didn't really follow that race. I was so wrapped up into the Walnut Creek City Council and the Measure O race.
Yeah.
I know it didn't turn out. Sean brought up a great point about districts. That's a textbook example of how you don't have to have much to win.
Yeah.
Right.
If you can focus on those districts and the difference they make. Well, in our last 60 seconds.
Tim is a good guy. I was surprised, very surprised to see that if that is the eventual outcome. The other race in Concord people were watching was Laura Hoffmeister.
Right.
And she, I think Ring did a good job of closing that gap. Couldn't prevail, but did a good job.
And that was Concord City Council, not Martinez. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Well, thank you. Great program. In our last few moments, I want to thank the chamber, thank our terrific panelists, and everyone for the good questions. Thank Hope Fenton, been here in the Bay Area for 70 years, and we're happy to do these public service programs so that we're in civic engagement and knowing what's going on in our communities. You've heard from some of the best people in the East Bay and the state of California. Bob, can I give you final words as our host?
Yeah, first of all, thank you all for your participation. Catherine, extraordinary job as usual. We really appreciate you doing this. Just one final commercial. On the Chamber's website, you'll notice that we announced that for a couple of decades, we've held the East Bay Women's Conference, mostly in San Ramon or entirely in San Ramon. We're moving it to Walnut Creek this year in March. I know Catherine's excited in her role as a member of the DRAA board, but Kathy Najimy, the actress, women's advocate, is going to be one of our featured speakers. March 7th of next year. Our website has the information on it. That's the only commercial I want to give, other than thank you all. This is truly an extraordinary election to be. It's great that we waited a week. We probably could have waited longer to get some of the results, but you folks were fabulous in your analysis. And Rob, it's great to see you from a distance. And
Bob,
Sean,
you too,
nice to
thank you.
meet you. So thank you all for coming, and we'll bid you all good day.
We will. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
All right.